Did we start? Yes. Hello and welcome to an- another discussion in the SF Masterworks reading group. I forgot where to look for a second for where the recording has started. But yes, we read one book in the SF Masterworks collection every month in the order they were published as Masterworks. Today we are discussing Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon, who is a repeat author for us, I think. Is he the second repeat author we've had after Philip K. Dick? Have we?
I think so. I can't think of anybody else. I'm just actually looking at the list. No, there's nobody else that's been repeated yet apart from PKD.
Oh, nice. Okay, interesting. And
Oh no,
you know,
Alfred Bester. Alfred Bester. It's been on
Bester,
twice.
yeah.
oh yeah, Bester,
That's
Bester.
right.
We
Yeah.
had yes. So if you'd like to read any of these books along with us, if you'd like to read the whole thing with us, please, you're welcome to. If you'd like to pick and choose, I will tell you what's coming up next in just a moment because I did not pull this page up like I should have. All right. I'm pretty sure the next one is Behold the Man by Michael Moorcock, who I'm excited to read. Yes, I've never read anything by him. That should be fun. The Book of Skulls by Robert Silverberg, who is also an author that I'm interested in reading. And then the book after that is actually a book that collects The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds together, but we will be reading those over 2 months by H.G. Wells. That's that's the reading plan for the next 4 months. If you'd like to join us for any of these, please check out the Page Chewing Forum. That's where we do all the planning. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. We meet once a month. Jared, could you start us off with introductions? Well, not start, like continue, I guess.
All right, restarting recording, and I'm Jared. I'm the fancy thinker, and yes, please join us if you want to read along, and also from these podcast speculations with my two friends here, and also weekly polls with my friend Steve and Mike, and also the Oscar Project with my friends Steve and Chris, and so I'll doing a whole bunch of stuff on Page Chewing. Check it out.
Jared's a busy man. Chris.
You can find me at the Chronicle of Chris YouTube channel, and in comparison, that feels like not very much compared to Jared. Jared's probably left about 10 things off there as well. But yes,
But you
many
are
of those
in most
podcasts.
of those things.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm also in most of those things. I just spend my weekends hanging out mostly with you two. I mean, that's pretty much true.
Yeah, for me, that's a great way to spend my weekend.
Yeah.
But what was I saying? Yes, I would very much like to know what this guy has been smoking and how I can get some. The guy who wrote the book.
Do you know what? I'll actually start Varsha in this, but because I read the premise, the setup of being on the hill and all that kind of stuff, and I went, "Oh, this is very different. This is pretty cool." And then by about chapter 4 was like, "No, this is definitely no Olaf Stapledon book. Like, this is definitely." I could have told you who wrote this, even if I didn't see the name on the cover.
It was there. The signs were there much earlier than that, where he never referred to his wife by name, didn't even call her his wife, just that special person with the special younger people in the house over there by the hill. Like, I'm very curious about why he abstracted that out. Like, maybe it didn't make sense in given the scope of everything else. Like, he does talk about it a little bit, like, how do I go back to my mundane life after experiencing all of this? So maybe that's the perspective he's writing from, and therefore, the wife doesn't even get called a wife, but just that special person. At least she's special, I guess.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, actually, because now that you mention it, there's a lot of talk about reproduction and mating in this, but almost none about love and relationships, if you know what I mean. It's very much, it doesn't seem to be something that he ever really discusses, which, given the scope of this book, it kind of covers literally everything else in the universe.
Yes.
Yes. Like everything. How can you pack everything in 200 pages? Like everything.
It's like the okay, I'm gonna make a weird analogy, but it's like the book he wrote before, Last and First Men, was like this balloon that he then blew up and wrote this book.
Love that analogy. That's a great one. Yep.
Yeah. Very interesting. I don't know if you guys have the same preface as I do in your copies.
I
Um,
don't have mine
There
with me.
is a forward in this, and I'll tell you who it's by, because it did actually listen to it rather than think.
well,
It's
it's a
by
preface.
Brian Aldous.
It's a preface by him, though.
Oh no! This one has a foreword by Brian Aldous in it.
Because he writes a preface in here that where he like he is like he's kind of upset about the state of the world because this book was written in 1937, and he's very upset about the state of the world. He's upset about the sympathy towards people who are writing fiction like he is. How much lacking it is, like, and people are cutting it down and putting it down and saying it's not important. And so it was a very interesting preface, and he really you can kind of see that in some of the writing of the book when he's mentioning stuff about compassion and you know, getting to a more spiritual plane of existence in your mind so that you don't have to have the barbaric fighting. It was quite obvious throughout the book that all the violent races he came across were just basically Nazis in disguise. and it was quite interesting to read that preface and read the book in that, with that in mind, as because it was definitely heavy on his mind as he was writing this.
The book was published in 1922, right? So that preface he must have written during or after the Second World War. Was it 1920?
Was it published in 23?
No, I thought it was 37.
30s. Yes, it's definitely around the time when Europe is in the throes of the change that was happening, because as Sarge says, there is definitely lots of overtones. In fact, this general kind of almost wistful thinking of our main character, who kind of thinks that if only people could see the bigger picture, then we wouldn't worry about any of this kind of crap, this nuts and bolts crap that we have going on Earth. And I think that comes out quite a lot through a lot of the stages that he goes through. Every time there's war happens, they see that war has actually been no good for the building of the galaxy, the progression of the galaxy. It's actually held you back, this kind of supremacy thing that's happening the whole way through it. And it's like, honestly, his colors have been nailed to the mast the whole way through every part of this book, in terms of, like, wars happen, but no good comes from them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know why I thought 22. Maybe the copyright was 22. Anyway, I'll figure that out. But yeah, that was interesting. Actually, I was starting to think that maybe I had misunderstood, or like I was rethinking parts of was it Last and First Men that I was hating on, that like maybe I should read them in a different light. Like I still very much like the parts that I had issues with, where he talked about entire countries as one person and ascribed attributes to them. That part I have issues with. But there were some other things that maybe I need to rethink. I will definitely not be rereading that book anytime soon, but I will probably need to rethink some aspects.
Interesting. Yeah, interestingly enough, because Last and First Men was written in 1930, and he probably hadn't quite seen the rise of Nazism yet. And this, there is a different perspective, a little bit of different perspective infused into this narrative, that since it was written after that rise of Nazism was apparent. Yeah,
but it's like we always say about these books. Sci-fi is about the today when it was written, like very much so. Pretty much in every instance that you can think of, it's influenced by cultural and philosophical thoughts of the time. And like this one's again very clear. But like, whereas Last and First Men sort of felt rambling at a certain point as we just progress through time, and it's like, it's almost like in this book, that section where he just meets another type of race. You know what I mean? You're just putting another layer on top. It's not really progressing a narrative or understanding necessarily in any way. Whereas this one, I think, has much more cohesion to it in terms of like times and thoughts and ideas, and eventually leading up to this idea of star maker or the deity or the god, if you want, in some ways. And I even think the discussion about that becomes really interesting when he tries to tie it all back around and kind of meeting your maker and all that kind of stuff. Like there is definite way more depth in this than Last and First Men, which it just felt like it was just a procession of going through time and less interesting to me.
A little less chaotic. Yep.
Yeah.
It's also I think he started to talk about this in Last and First Men, this idea of a universal, or at least a compounded consciousness that sort of assimilates the consciousness. So, like, you are still you still have an individual self, but you are part of a whole, which feels very Buddhist to me. But then he also was expounding on the Christian theology, using the "Let there be light," which, funny story, I think that was the exact same thing, or like pretty much the exact circumstances in which, like, Neil deGrasse Tyson, he wrote a book, right? I forget what it's called, but in an interview, he talked about how there was "Let there be light," and like the universe was filled with light. So it was pretty cool to see that in this book too, the "Let there be light" part of the Star Maker. But I was going with this. Yeah, that was very interesting to me. The merging of the consciousnesses and how they became one person, and like he dedicated a whole chapter to telling us about. Like, I will say we, because I don't want you to think that I mean just myself.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was interesting because I think this is another classic case of this book has influenced so much of fiction comes after it. Oh. When he got to that part there, I was like, that almost didn't need to be said, but probably in 1937 it was a big thing, if you know what I mean, the separating of the we versus the I, because like cybernetics and all of that kind of stuff kind of comes off this idea that he had. So it's, again, very hard to split the fact of when this was written with kind of enjoyment or anything like that we're doing at the moment, but makes it utterly fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think especially like the stuff around the aliens, right? We've read even just for the Speculative Speculations podcast, we've encountered at least 4 different weird species. Just Adrian Tchaikovsky has 3 different ones himself. And like, I feel like this has to be one of the places where it all started, right? Like thinking deeply about what would work biologically for species, and like what societal structures you could use for said biological aspects. So I mean, I think it's easy for these books, especially after reading so many more modern science fiction, to say, yeah, I've seen it before, but this came first. I feel like that means something, even though it might be, say, more boring or repetitive. This probably was one of the first things of its kind, or maybe the only things of its kind.
Yeah, you're onto something there, because there's so many ideas in this book, like unbelievable ideas that I was like, oh wow, oh, he did the arachnid thing, he did the nautiloids, and it just kept going on. He actually made stars themselves have a conscious and be characters, and I'm like, that is wild. Like that is like, who, way back then, who would have thought of those things? And he had, a consciousness of the nebulae, and just and then he tied it all into, like you guys said, the mythologies, and how he was basically, as a telepathic conscious with the ability to travel through time and space, was basically a pilgrim on a search for God.
Yeah.
In a sense, the Star Maker. And he came up with all that Christian mythology stuff of a Star Maker having a dual conscious with a negative side and a positive side and stuff like that when he gets to the end. And so he infused all that in there, but he kept it so clinical and so matter of fact, like, this is what's happening, that I could see people definitely saying there's kind of a lack of passion in the writing by the way he uses description and just keeps it matter of fact, the whole time. Whereas I suspect in a more modern sci-fi book, you would have like this huge passionate revelations and all this stuff going on, whereas you didn't get that. He just gave you what it was, and he went back. Now I'm back at the beginning, you know. And but the ideas, there was so many.
Yes. Yeah, the thing with the stars, that was fascinating. Like, and my jaw dropped to the floor when he got there, which again I feel like um maybe I might be thinking of Wars of Light and Shadow, but there are some books that we've read recently that sort of attribute a consciousness to objects or even
Sure.
stars, right? But again, this came before all of that. And that said, while I am fascinated by that idea, I can't say I was too pleased about just how he described the consciousness of the stars and the galaxy. It felt too human. And I think that's fine. Like that's a fair way to write it. And he even sort of, hedged by saying, look, I experienced something that's much more magnificent than what I'm
Yeah.
describing, but I have to explain it
Yeah.
to humans. So this is the language I'm going to use. And that absolutely makes sense to me. But like again, Chani, what comes to mind? Like we've seen descriptions of star conscious, like not quite star consciousness, but like, you know, uh magnificent things described magnificently, so that fell a little short for me, but the idea itself, jaw drop. Galaxies sort of again working together as conscious beings, and again the events that led to the discovery that stars have a consciousness, that like they just randomly started exploding, like yeah, the stars are and just to look at it from that scale and magnitude. Yeah.
I was saying to Jared just during the week when we were talking very broadly, because I was saying I just finished it that day or something like that. Like, you could do a read along of this 10 pages at a time and talk for an hour and a half for every 10 pages. It is of that kind of length of depth and the things that happen. Like, just like every couple of pages has this enormous idea in it. Like, from the very start of how he even travels and gets there, the kind of moving his consciousness to like-minded consciousness, that there was sort of like a cosmic energy already existing at that early stage that would draw on like consciousnesses, but also adding maybe not at the same time, so it's not parallel time and all. Like, that's chapter 2. Like, there's just so much. There's so many ideas throughout this that I was sort of overwhelmed at times, and just at a certain point going, right, I'm just going to let this flow over me and see what it comes out with me at the end, the things that stick, because you could just delve into so much within it. And the problem, I think, in a reading perspective, is that it is all description. There is no dialogue in the book whatsoever.
Yeah.
It very much reads like a non-fiction book. There are no real characters apart from back to. That's literally the only character in the entire book. But even he's sort of eschewed as nothing much more than an avatar for him at a certain point. So again, the premise and setup felt like it was going to go in a slightly different direction, but it became then so much more than that. And just sort of the first part is very much about like pick your favorite race, you know.
Yeah. And with all that said, I think yes, there is a lot to talk about, and I love the stuff about consciousness that he's done in this book. And yeah, I could spend hours talking about just that bit. But also, it was nice that it was sort of variations on a theme, if that makes sense. Like you could
Definitely.
extract some very high level ideas that he's sort of approaching from many different directions, like the idea of a collective consciousness, and that different galaxies might collect different types of consciousness that then could dominate, right? And the reason why um, he gave us like detailed explanations for why the nautiloids were symbiotic, because like were the dominant consciousness, because they, from a very early stage in their development, they did create a sort of he started to use some other word for it, but it started as symbiotic consciousness,
Symbiotic,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so there's the whole thing with consciousness, there's the whole thing with pacifism of sorts, that sort of reiterating on this aspect that war never brought anyone any good. Instead, let's all, build our mind together and we can go exploring the universe together. um, and, maybe we can also talk to some stars in the process. And what were some other ones? Yeah, and then like the exploration of the creatures, it was interesting, but like yeah, after the fourth one, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of done with it. Let's move on. But
Right.
that, yeah, for all the level of detail that could feel somewhat overwhelming, it did have some like through lines that you could latch on to and say, I don't care about the detail that much, but I get the general idea. And I'm sure I missed things in reading the book that way, but I think I got enough to like have deep admiration and respect for this author. Like total turnaround from last and first man. Total turnaround.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was some interesting social commentary, like we've been saying the whole time. This book was obviously anti-war, an anti-war book. When he said that militarists were worried about preventing contraception because they were worried about the supply of cannon fodder declining.
Yeah.
And so he had a lot of little statements about like that, especially in the beginning when there's more relatable to Earth or other Earth where he went to. And he so that just came through, and he had all these little, like, just these throwaway science fiction ideas that, for instance, they had this automatic endocrine compensation system, which could enable the patient's blood to regulate itself automatically by tapping from communal drug pipes whenever chemicals were needed for correct physiological balance. And I'm like, that's a big science fiction idea. And it's just throwaway. He just mentions it on the side as he keeps going, So it's like you said, Chris, there's so much stuff packed into each section. You could pick it apart one by one and spend all day on it.
I have to admit, though, there were certain sections that I listened to and then read, because I did a lot of immersive reading actually for this the whole way through, and some of it is complete and utter word salad. Like I would read entire sentences back to myself and go, "This sentence doesn't even make any." It's so packed full of scientific terms and terminology that it also doesn't make any sense. And I wondered for myself whether that was just because of modern scientific thinking. Like a lot of that language is more widely known by the general populace than necessarily maybe it would have been the 37 or something. I can't attest to that, but it was like, oh, this sentence sounds fancy, but it also doesn't mean anything in some ways.
He repeated himself quite a bit,
Yeah.
in a lot of places, which is odd because the book's so short and he put so much into it. So how could he have room for repetition? But it was still there. There's a lot in there.
There is indeed.
I am with you on the word salad thing. Like, I mean, I think part of it was there were a lot of long sentences in the book, which I think the audiobook narrator did a really good job of breaking it up to consumable chunks. But some sections I had to stop listening and read because I was not able to focus even on the reading, especially the Star Maker sections. But it was cool. I seem to recall that he kind of he used matter, antimatter, and annihilation in Last and First Men, but like he had the wrong scientific theory from what I remember. I don't remember if he used it again in this one, but he did make references to it. And I think some of the universes that were shaped by the Star Maker, they had the Christian one with the good and evil and the heaven and hell stuff, and they had and I think they had a universe where each was the opposite of the other, kind of like I can't believe I go back to Cities in Flight when we talk about Stapledon, but the big matter antimatter universe colliding. There was one of those in this too, right? Like they didn't collide, but it was interesting that he did use, I think, a lot of that must have been a really cool time to live, because a lot of discoveries, like as a scientific person, there are a lot of discoveries made. And he is a philosopher that this book is a literal thought experiment. We talk about how science fiction is often sort of expansion of thought experiments. This one is a literal thought experiment. Yeah.
One of the other big things that came out through me is the fact that each civilization or race has a finite amount of time. So we talk an awful lot about decay of civilization and decay of races, and actually they only last for so long because, and in a lot of cases, it was stuff that they did to themselves, through their choice, either through war or annihilation, or they failed to adapt to the changing environment around them or whatever's done. And I think that the bit that I think he was quite clever in how he did it, because I think he used the symbiotic race first. They introduced them to those first as setting the tone for how they did adapt well, so that when we got the later races and the plant men and the avian races and all of that kind of symbiotic races, that they didn't do the same, and that he was able to tie it back around to the symbiotic races, people who sort of had a lot of good stuff figured out. So we narratively set that out very cleverly, I thought, in terms of giving us an expectation and then being able to refer to it later and then have them sort of as the hero race at the end to come back around. It was because it was almost like, yay, the Avengers are here. And with their ability to mate telepathically, another like wild, crazy, massive idea. But I was like, but he sort of started to say, and obviously, these things would telepathically mate with this stuff in the sea and underground, and then they didn't have to be in the same place or time, and they could still mate and do. It's like.
Yes.
And through this group mind, he mentions that these things can be potentially immortal,
Yes.
So it's just like, like you said, idea upon idea.
And I don't know, I'd be curious to know if Tchaikovsky counts this book as one of his influences, because the thing about I might be mildly, like, I'll try to say this in a way that doesn't spoil Children of Time, but the thing where the nautiloids go and influence other races to be more peaceful, that feels familiar. Like, that feels a bit Tchaikovsky like.
Yeah, it does. I thought about Tchaikovsky quite a bit while reading this book, because of the Children of Time series, and yeah, he even mentions one time here, not one step could we have taken without the constant support of those brilliant ichthyoid and arachnoid symbiotics who played a leading part in the history of our galaxy. And that had Tchaikovsky written all over it. And
right? Yeah,
just
especially the third book.
I'm like, did he read that line and decide to write this series?
I think it's actually highly likely that Adrian Tchaikovsky has read Olaf Stapledon. I would imagine so, because Stapledon's a British writer, classic, and Adrian Tchaikovsky is somebody that strikes me, the brief time I spoke to him and in the things that he does, that he has the same kind of one. He's a student of not just science, but psychiatry, psychology, and that kind of stuff, but also very well read, and he likes this idea of a thought idea. So he takes the premise like Stapledon does at the start of his thing, like plant men. Here, we're going to do a thing about plant men, and he riffs on it for an entire book, and then Tchaikovsky will say, well, I actually had another idea for another direction I went, and he'll just write another series or another book about the same idea again and again. So like, if he must, and if he hasn't, he would love him. I think he would be an absolute fan. I think that'd be a thing.
If he hasn't
met Stapledon?
If he hasn't read this, there's some other kind of symbiotic thing going on.
Yes, absolutely. They're telepathically mating across time. Olaf Stapledon and Adrian Tchaikovsky. There's a thumbnail idea for somebody if they want one. Sorry, Adrian. Sorry.
Oh man.
But yes, Children of Time sticks out. In fact, a lot of the kind of ideas that Tchaikovsky kind of riffs on are a lot of the same ideas that Stapledon kind of talks about, differences in biology and actually how environment can impact progression and growth, and all of those kind of things are very much of Tchaikovsky's writing.
Yeah, the various creatures, and then like some of the aspects of society, and their influence on the world and the universe. Yeah.
I'm going through my tabs here as we speak, and
I'm interested in how you're doing that, because I've kind of been like, it's mostly my fault, but we've been all over the place.
That's okay,
directionally.
But one of the things he states in here is even the people who are suffering from the mania of herd glory are composed of individuals who in their private life are sane. And I think that is a direct statement about Nazism and what was going on in Germany there. And he's mentioning it, of course, in relation to some sort of strange earth he's on at the time here. But it's interesting because he keeps throughout the book a lot. He keeps referring to these other planets as, he still refers to them as relatable as a race, even though it's a different planet. He called like other Earth, Earth. It was like other humans, even though when he described them, they were completely different looking. Than humans are. And I was just like, it was kind of an interesting, weird thing that they would still refer to themselves as humans, even though they look completely different. And I think that idea is kind of interesting because, we're used to like, the Star Trek, these are Vulcans, and these are just because they have a little ear or something, and they still
their
look
blood's
human.
a different color,
right.
That kind of
stuff. But he doesn't go there. He still calls them humans or humanoids or what have you, until he gets into the really strange stuff like spiders and what have you. But it's interesting just thinking about the age of when this was written and how these ideas he waited. Man, he had so many ideas.
And there were several that were sort of relevant to the discussions we have today about, I don't know about if he touched on AI, but he certainly touched on mass media and information overload and how it can be used for propaganda, which I imagine was probably an issue in 1937 too. I think he was speaking about it in terms of the radio at the time, which now it's the internet. But I think for the first other Earth, he talked about how society fell apart a little bit because of the negative effects of the mass media of the time, which was the radio. But yes.
Well, it was basically Wall-E and Brave New World. Again, this is 37. Before both of those, Brave New World took that idea, ran with it. And there's so many. Like, you'd read a section and go, well, that's basically that thing, or that's it. Like, you had the Death Star basically in here out of Star Wars. The planet killers. Like, I was like, this is honestly, I just have this vision that every creative person in Hollywood or around the world has a copy secretly of Star Maker on their shelf, and they're like, right, we need a new idea for a film or something. They go, hold on, and they'll just kind of open the book randomly and go, right, I'll read this page. Right, I've got one. We're good. Let's base a whole cinematic universe about that.
That's an idea for a movie right there, Chris. Just what you said, that as an idea. So meta.
That's very up the day, isn't it? But it is honestly, it's so ridiculous. And my great fear about this discussion today was very much that somebody would come along and say, Jared, haven't tabbed it. But my favorite part was this, and he'd be speaking about it, and I'd be going, I remember. There's too much stuff. I don't remember that at all. I have no idea what you're talking about. But it actually has been, so far to this point anyway, reasonably. Like, yes, I follow. Yeah, I know where we're at.
Yeah, and you brought up plant when I'd forgotten that was there. Like I remember again having jaw drop moments when I was listening to that bit.
I
Until he
know.
got like super detailed about the biology. I was like, yeah, no, just the idea is enough. Thank you. Let's move on. but, but yes, that was really cool, right? And that I think I am extremely blown away by I don't know just the level of at least the expansion of the universe stuff. That one's clearly either been researched or he's read enough like newspaper articles of the time to put together. Like this is stuff that we still talk about today, right? That physicists are still working on and discussing. So that does seem coherent from what I know of the physics. It's that part of it is coherent. So I'm guessing a lot of the biology might be well researched too. I'm not familiar with that, but even without the research, it feels like it has at the very least an illusion of cohesion and like this could work, right? And the level of thought that has gone into it and the just to design the scope. I think the only other thing that I can think of that I've had my mind blown away by just the scope of it is Malazan. And like this one, like even Malazan doesn't come close to the scope and scale of what's going on in this book.
Malazan takes 800 pages to do it per book. This
That's
one
true.
does it in
Yes.
250. Like it's just nonsense
That's
in
true.
some ways about how dense it is and how
uh,
ridiculously chock full of ideas.
Yeah, it's just well, it's universal scope, and that doesn't get much bigger than that. And so it's crazy how big the scope is, and still towards the end of the book, you're getting titles like the supreme moment nears. Like we're not even like done with being bigger. Like the book just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as we go on.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I keep on falling over the fact, like, rocket ships weren't a thing. Man hadn't gone to the moon for another, like, 30 years at this stage, and he's talking about the start of it flying backwards from the Earth through space, and I was like, this is insane. Like, can you imagine reading this at that time? Like, never mind, writing it, but if you just pick this up and were kind of making your way through it, you'd be just like, holy hell. It probably sold as you only need one book for the next decade. It's Star Maker. You can read a page a day and reread a page a day, and you'll have loads of thoughts and ideas and content and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And you can make 100 movies.
200, 250, I don't know, per page there is a movie.
Movies that only started then as well, they weren't too long in the go.
Yeah.
But you were mentioning Varsha about the research he must have done, or at least the amount of reading. He must have been very well read, and he did make a little mention to an earlier work of science fiction in here towards the end of the book. He mentioned that precarious, let's see, life on these worlds was almost like life in a two-dimensional flatland, and that is I think a reference to Abbott's science fiction novel from the late 19th century, Flatland. And so I think Olaf was our friend Olaf here was very, very well read.
Our friend Olaf. Yes.
Well, we've read 2 books of his now, and that's sort of what this journey feels like. Sometimes when you
Yes.
come back and revisit somebody and the work, especially at a different stage, it does feel like you have a familiarity kind of coming back to doing it and using the previous works and how you're talking about this one, because there are definite parallels between this and First and Last Man. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah. I think he did mention like some of the incidences of First and Last Men in here.
He did.
As like a side thing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to ask, do you think this guy is the narrator of the First and Last Men? Because he said I've talked about this in that other book. Yeah. So he's the one. I remember thinking at the time, like the impression that we got was that by the way, we've been like freely spoiling First and Last One. Not that there is much to spoil there. It is like a history book. How do you spoil history? But
And you can't really spoil this one either. Like
yeah.
in a lot of ways, it's just a collection of ideas. You know, it's not like one leads on to another one that kind of ruins it, or it doesn't know.
But just so our listeners are aware, if you care about spoilers,
Yeah.
we're doing it for Last and First Man. But the way he talks about it, for it felt like he was talking to us from the end of time, right? But then the human race comes to an end on Neptune, not nearly towards the end of time. Like it's very much in the early stages of the universe, or at least not towards the end of it. So I was confused about that, and I'm glad we got an explanation for it. Like, it was an explanation I didn't know I wanted, but it was an explanation I needed.
Yeah.
So, but okay, the other thing I wanted to talk about was, I kind of think I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, but to keep us grounded, he did make the Star Maker feel very human, right? Like this thing about how he's just playing with the early universes here. He tied it up into knots and created a time loop here. He's just having fun with creation. We are all collateral damage. That's fine. Like a child Star Maker. I think, again, like there were parts of it that felt a little too human to me, but mostly I think he did a really good job of sort of treading that line of magnificence and humanity.
Well, he kind of represents a different idea of God here, which again I thought was like very wild and big. You know, it wasn't the all-knowing God, the creator who knows everything, creates the world, and then creates his playfield. It was very much more human, as has been alluded to. The Star Maker, the deity, kind of created things, made mistakes, started over again, did that kind of stuff over and over again, and it was sort of like, I don't think it was said this way, but it was almost as if it was different people or different contributors rather than just one person, if you know what I mean. The Star Maker, sort of like that collective thought that it was kind of using all of the inputs around it. Now, I don't think it necessarily said that, but it was sort of, that's the way that it read to me in some ways, which again is a very different idea, I think, than what a lot of other people would have been doing with about deities and God, and kind of expressing that. And the really interesting thing for me about it is he writes the book and he writes the thing in such a way that it doesn't insult people who are religious either. You know, the two things are not they're not kind of saying, oh, I'm a scientist, I don't believe in God. It was very much kind of a synthesis of the ideas to say that these two things can happen at the same time. They are not necessarily mutually exclusive, which I thought was, again, very big idea and very well put together, you know?
Yeah.
I thought that was very clever on his part, that he definitely wasn't seeking to alienate anybody from any walk of life. As he was going through the universe and trying to explain it, he did err towards a kind of Christian outlook in some cases, but he also infused a bunch of other ideas from other places as well. The whole multiple conscious thing really takes from various different thought sources and stuff like that, Eastern and Western. And he also almost approached it as, like we said earlier, a search for God, even though he never specifically mentions that term. It's obvious that the Star Maker is a stand-in for God and searching for God, and that it's and he tells us right off the bat that it's not. It's this own creative being that inadvertently at some point created us, but also created all this other stuff in all his creative experiments, and has kind of a split personality problem every once in a while, and and it's kind of, and it's amusing because he's describing it, and at the time there's nothing offensive about it. There's nothing, and And I just liked how he put that together. Like you said, he put it together very cleverly. And it was just like, I don't know, it reminded me a lot of the deist thought back in the early 1700s. The thoughts of deism, of how God created, then just went away or what have you, and it's up to everybody else just to figure it out. And how they kind of also tried to straddle the line of not alienating people and just not delving too much into having a rigid system of this is how it is, leaving the ideas open, but explaining them in a way that just was interesting to read about, and not making any judgments and not making any definitive statements about how things should be. And I really I appreciated that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It almost felt like an explanation for the religious lore and mythology, right? Like he put the words "Let there be light" in the Star Maker's mouth, and he made a case for sort of an indifferent god, so to speak, like who's not really interested in your day to day, which is what you said, Jared, like created and left. But also there were very much aspects of it, like almost he gave explanations for why we have the, I want to call it mythology, I don't know if that's the right word, that we do about, heaven and hell and whatnot.
Sure.
So like the creatures sort of being reused across universes, and they transition and so on. So you probably have echoes of memory that to tell you about those universes. But like I love that, woven in all of that, even though he created an alternative origin for the god, it was almost like, how do you, and I think this is what he explains in the beginning, that how does god exist in a scientific world, right? And maybe this is how, and that, yeah, that makes sense. I appreciated that.
Yeah, that's like, I think you mentioned the impressions, or the things that stay with the human race over time. And I think that's another thing. Like Arthur C. Clarke stole that idea of impressions in what the human race thinks about things in Childhood's End, if you ever read that. And so it's like just more stuff that this guy had to have influenced going forward in the history of science fiction.
Yeah. He also he addresses this idea of death as being not a final state, if that makes sense. So he talks about this way back early on in the book, I think maybe about chapter 4 or something from my notes, about the fact that he thinks he may be dead. Actually, he may be dead himself. And then when the annihilation of the stars and the conflict is happening, about the higher order readers aren't worried about death. They'd rather die rather than contribute to war and doing that kind of stuff. And then the symbiosis of consciousness and all of that kind of stuff. But the fact that if we evolve or reach a higher state, death is nothing to be feared. Death is not a thing that will necessarily be the end of our civilization or our thing. It's just a natural form of state. And again, very evolved thinking and interesting philosophical thinking, sort of presented along all of these other ideas.
Yes, and that has echoes too. I think, if I remember correctly, there was an iteration of humanity in Last and First Men that committed mass suicides, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
to help support the larger goal. So that seems to be another recurring theme that he explores. Yeah. I think I think the biggest thing this book has done for me is sort of made me change my mind about how I feel about Olaf Stapledon as an author. Yeah, not the biggest thing. Like,
but it's as we said just before recorded, we rate each one of these. This is a book I find impossible to rate, and that's why I just generally hate reading books in general, because on one level this is like unbelievable god tier level genius.
Yes,
page after page after page after page. It's not easy to read. In fact, if I hadn't been doing this discussion, I probably would have read this over the course of about a year in like little bits, if you know what I mean, because to do it in a shorter space of time feels a lot. Having said that, this discussion is proof to me that actually doing it in that way, you retain far more of the bigger ideas than you do, because there's certainly a lot of sections I was worried, like, I'm never going to remember this, for a discussion or to be able to talk about in any kind of length. But because we have these discussions, it always surprises me how much kind of comes to the fore, and how one person can say one thing and something that you thought you'd long forgotten kind of comes back in. Yeah, you just grab it, and it's I just think it's so interesting and fascinating about this. Is a started writing that just wouldn't happen. This would never be published today. Just absolutely no way at all. Nobody would go near this, because it eschews everything that you're supposed to do in modern writing in a lot of ways, about having a narrative fed through and all of that kind of stuff. But in the same stage, it can be impressive and expand the mind in all the right ways that good literature does,
Yeah. There's no likable character to latch onto.
No.
There's no, there's no real like plot to follow that you're wondering what happens next. He pretty much tells you in the title what happens next, and it's not like what happens in a mystery. It's here's the next stage of history, and so you're right. I don't think it would go over today. I don't think it would get anyone's attention at all, and which is kind of sad. But I don't know. Can you think of any book today that's popular that has this kind of an explanation-based thought thrown at you? That I couldn't. But
the closest thing I can think of, and was sort of alluded to, sort of Children of Time, has a lot of these kind of ideas throughout the 3 books, if you know what I mean. But there is a narrative and characters, etc., all woven into that. It's told in a very different style and way. And I think that's an evolution of this kind of idea, and why Adrian Tchaikovsky is so beloved by an awful lot of people that read science fiction, because this idea of riffing on an idea or a change from our society into something else is something that will always be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, even Erickson's Rejoice was a thought idea, a thought. What do you call it?
Thought experiment.
Yeah. But even that, the main character Samantha in that was a very enjoyable character to read. So it wasn't like this where it's like, there's nobody here that you care about, and
it would be called a bold choice to never name your main characters, which I guess Vandermeer does, but you get attached to like there are things to like you think of them as people, right? Not these consciousness. Like you don't even think of. I didn't think of the main guy at all. Like just something floating. In my head, it was the author talking far more than the person we are supposedly following, right? So, this author spoils his own books. He does not have a main character I can attach myself to. There's too much exposition. He tells, does not show.
Yeah. But all said, it's freaking brilliant.
There was one other real section that resonated with me, again, the commentary on thing. So how he deals with racial prejudice and cultural prejudice in The Other Earth with the idea of taste. They judge each other in taste. I just thought, what an absolutely amazing allegory or metaphor for how ridiculous that whole idea is. The fact that person literally tastes different. That's why we are repulsed by it, because it's not my taste. Then they can't see it as a way of segregating society and stuff. I just thought, wow, like that is really powerful as an idea to kind of like a mirror to shine back against society, to go like, this is messed up, people.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Chris, you taste like bacon, so
yeah, I mean if you're gonna taste like anything, I'll take bacon. Yep.
I can't countenance that, sorry.
Milkshake might be the only other one that I might want to be.
I'm trying to think what mine would be. Potatoes? Too generic.
Potatoes. That tastes like potatoes.
Can I be eggplant?
Eggplant. Oh.
You don't want to be eggplant. Think about it. Because I was just going to say, this is a hell of a Tinder profile. I taste like potatoes.
Oh no! Oh no!
That's an interesting thought experiment. We'll put up 2 profiles. I taste like bacon. I taste like potatoes. We'll see.
Well, how many Okay, so potatoes even non-vegetarians like, right? So I think I stand a better chance.
Interesting. I like where this is going.
Sorry about that. All right.
Yep, it's all Jared's fault.
Eggplant.
No. Well, it just goes to reinforce how ridiculous it is, and what he was pointing out in here is how ridiculous it is to put people on such dividing lines as something as unimportant as looks, tastes, beliefs, what have you. And so just amazing ideas in this book.
And the last thing I sort of want to say, because again, we do these streams together, and it's not every book where this is relevant, but I sort of look at the 3 of us, and if Livia had been here, Susanna, etc., we've such a broad swathe of cultural backgrounds and all of that kind of stuff. I think this book is a sort of like magnificent talking point about all of that kind of stuff, and how we would bring our own perspectives and our own backgrounds sort of to a book like this, and how we read things either completely the same regardless of that, or slightly different because of those. And I think, really, really interesting. I might have to change my rating, as often happens at the end of these conversations.
Interesting. Yes. I think enjoyment wise it wasn't very high for me, but in terms of ideas, and I don't know, I waver back and forth between being objective and subjective on these ratings, but this one, it kind of has to be masterwork.
Can't call it a masterwork, but it is. But I have to say, there are ones that I have rated very highly that this one I will remember much more from. Whereas Last and First Men is sort of forgettable to a certain point. Like the general idea and what he tried to do, I know exactly what that's about. This one has ideas and things that I'll probably think about a lot more than even some of the other more kind of famed books maybe in this list that we've read so far.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, the next star you talk to, Chris, you'll know what to say, right?
When I become a star, that's the kind of idea, when that happens, is
Yeah.
Yes. Ooh, I like that. I don't know. Do you guys have this? I don't know if it's part of our mythology or if it's just something that I got from a movie. But when people die, they become stars in the sky.
That's right.
So...
All right. Well,
you rock up into the consciousness and go, "You'll remember me. I taste like bacon."
All right, don't go dying on us anytime soon now.
Don't make the sky taste like bacon crisp.
I'll be walking up going, "It smells like potatoes. Is Varsha already here?" You haven't pictures yet, Jared, by the
way. What's that?
You haven't pictures yet?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I'll abstain.
Jared is obviously a filet mignon. We'll choose for you. Okay. All right. Once again, the next 3 books we'll be talking about will be... Sorry, did anyone have anything else to add, or are we good? Okay, sounded like we were about to wrap up. Yeah. Behold the Man by Michael Moorcock for May. Actually, we're recording this in May, but this was April's book. The Book of Skulls by Robert Silverbug in July. The Time Machine in August, and The War of the Worlds in September, both by H.G. Wells. Yes, and thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next month. Bye.